2 minutes. Okay, we'll get started again. I hope you had opportunity to have some coffee. I don't notice that too many people have run away. A couple of chairs here. So hopefully most of you have come back. Probably the most important thing to get out of today is networking. And so I really encourage you at any of these sort of events to talk to your colleagues and swap ideas, make contacts. I think it's probably the most important aspect of any conference or seminar such as this. So I encourage you to talk to different people over the course of a day. Okay. Really strong humans. Some of you in the audience will have had the opportunity to actually work with men and women who are exceptionally strong. This is one such human, Werner Gunther, 2 metres tall, 129 kilograms. He competed in the Olympics, several Olympics actually, in both the shot put and decathlon, and then in the winter, for something to do, he actually competed in the Winter Olympics in the bobsled. This is just one example of a human being who is extraordinarily strong. Now, if you've ever had the opportunity to work with athletes such as this, you realise, and this is a very old video, that such individuals are exceptional, they are unique. It is through genetics, but also through training, as you can see, that they have exceptional strength and power. The phrase "hard to kill" comes to mind. Werner's probably a little bit like the original Terminator movie, if you remember Arnold Schwarzenegger in his heyday. No matter what they threw at him, he just kept on, the machine just kept on coming at you. And this is the type of training and the exceptional resilience that an athlete such as this have. And having worked with athletes at this level, you come to understand and appreciate the underlying qualities that they have and how that makes them different, and how they can exceed due to their incredible physiological capacity, psychological capacity, and in particular their ability to train at an entirely different level to the other athletes that you are working with. One aspect of this which is difficult in many cases to sell, particularly to many coaches, is the concept of the athlete being bigger. As we've seen in the fundamentals we looked at this morning, strength is intimately tied to the size of the muscle. We looked at a whole range of other factors, neural factors, pronation angle, architecture, etc., but at the basic level, the ultimate strength of the athlete is driven by the cross-sectional area of their muscle. Strength and power, we saw this morning, are intimately linked. To take home point from today is an athlete can be strong and powerful, but an athlete cannot be powerful and not strong. That's shown over and over again. Presented at least 20, 30 studies this morning showing that strength, you have to be strong if you want to be powerful and fast. In many sports, particularly combative sports, It is the functional strength that is important. And tied to this is their mass, their weight, and their momentum. So this is critical for any combat sport. Now, I heard yesterday that rugby union is gaining some interest here in Portugal. And success in these sports, rugby union, rugby league, American football, any sport which involves combatant activity with your opponent, it is your actual strength, power and the momentum that you can develop, which is a critical determinant of your success. So the combination here, this very high functional mass, your inertia, which is your mass, and momentum, your mass times your speed, is very important in these sorts of sport. So we're going to have a look at why this is important, the mechanism, and some practical recommendations on this. Rugby league is a sport, probably the most popular sport in Australia. It's very similar to rugby union, perhaps probably a little bit faster, I would say. Wonderful athletes to work with. Their weight is around the 90 to 120 kilograms. In an 80-minute game, they have to run, depending on position, around 12 kilometres during that time, while 13 other players on the other team are trying to kill them. It's an extremely fast, very combative sport. They're quite unique athletes. They do not wear protective equipment other than some will wear a soft protection on their head, not a hard helmet, just a soft padding on their head. But it's a very interesting sport to study, and a colleague of mine, Dan Baker, and I spent many years studying these particular athletes, and this was a paper we published back in 2002. And what we looked at was the relationship between those players that actually progressed to the national level of competition and how it's related to measures of strength, power, and their actual body mass, how much they weigh. And we see 1 RM bench press has a correlation of 0.8. So if you cannot lift a lot of weight in the bench press, you'll never play at the national level in Australia of rugby league. It is an enormous determinant. Bench throw, which is a test we commonly do, lying on the back and actually throw a weight in the air, a barbell into the air in a Smith machine. Correlation of 0.7. Jump squat, 0.6. And then their body mass, their actual body mass, is correlated 0.42. So the heavier the athlete, the more likely they're going to make it to the national level. The problem, however, is hypertrophy in a lot of sports is questioned. The importance of hypertrophy, muscle size, to performance is questioned by a lot of athletes and coaches. There is the issue of interference. Many of you will know that certain types of training interfere with other types of training. Excessive muscle hypertrophy can cause a reduction in the aerobic capacity of the muscle, simply because with larger muscle size, any given muscle fibre is further from a source of oxygen, a source of circulation. There is concern that it might reverse other qualities in the athlete if you make them too big. The greatest challenge that we see in the sports that I generally deal with, which are basketball, volleyball, football, the round ball game, rugby league, rugby union, is in particular maintenance of lean body mass in season is a massive challenge. Probably one of our greatest challenges actually in terms of training is actually keeping size on the athlete over the course of the season. And what we quite often see is that due to competition demands and training demands, and also the fact that the head coach will make us back off on strength training, the athletes are getting smaller and smaller and smaller across the course of the season. This, of course, is a problem because when you get to your most important games in the finals, the athlete is smaller, weaker and less powerful than at the start of the season. So we've spent a lot of time trying to actually overcome this. What we do know is one of the main determinants of hypertrophy is what's called the volume load. It's not so much the intensity of the bout of exercise. Intensity of the resistance training tends to shift adaptations in terms of the neuromuscular system rather than actual muscle growth. It's the total volume load which is the most, at the moment, seems to be the most significant stimulator of muscle growth. And that's a problem because in season in particular, it is difficult to accommodate a large volume of resistance training load when they have to compete and also do skills and tactical training. So that's a consideration. I'll try and press again the importance of strength. In this case, this was a particular study that we published in 2005, once again with Dan Baker, looking at leg strength and success. In this case, it was again in rugby league. And what we found also was that the stronger the athlete, the higher level of play that they were able to achieve. What we also look at is how much of a shift, a change, can we produce in our athletes. This is also a constant area of controversy, is if you have an athlete at a very high level, can you actually change them? Can you actually improve them, given all that they have to also have to compete and to train? I'll give you just one example, once again, working with Baker. This is in very, very high level rugby league. These rugby league players were at the time in the top 20 in the world, I would estimate. These were exceptional athletes if you look at them across any sport. But if you have a look at this, over 4 years at the professional leagues, we were able to increase their bench throw. So this is a weighted throw, lying on the back in a bench throw position, throwing the weight. Their upper body power by about 39%. Their bench press went from 135 to 180 over that time. That's a 33% increase at a relatively constant body mass of 110 kilograms. I'm showing you these examples because these athletes, as you can see, are exceptionally strong. Because I want to show you that even at the very highly level developed of strength, in an elite athlete you can still produce considerable improvements in strength and power, despite the fact that these men will have been training, weight training would have at least 6 to 8 years of strength training history prior to entering the pro level, the professional level. Once they get into the pros, though, here it's quite difficult to get them to improve, but we see that the changes in power are almost entirely determined by increases in strength at this level. What we know is that once an athlete becomes quite strong, any further improvements in power are generally dictated by increasing further their level of strength. In this particular group, we're only able to shift them by about 12 to 15% over 4 years. So in the early stages, while we saw 30 to 40% improvements, we see that once they are in the professional leagues, the amount of improvement that you can expect from your athletes, if they're already strong, is only about 12 to 15%. This is over 4 years at a relatively constant body weight. So 1998 to 2002, they went from 96 to 99 kilos, 3 kilos increase. But their 1RM squat went from 160 to 183. So quite a marked improvement. This is an example from rugby union, and I'm sorry I'm showing you sports which probably aren't of much relevance to you. The reason why is I'm trying to show you sports where the strength of the athletes is very, very high. If you take an untrained athlete, it really doesn't matter what you do to them. Just about everything works. Okay, so another take-home message from today is everything works, nothing works forever. Okay, and that's why in a lot of training experience, we throw different things at our athletes and we say, wow, they got better, this is great, this new training idea is fantastic. It works for 4 to 6 weeks and then it will decline in terms of their improvement. So we'll talk a little bit later this afternoon about the issue of different fads and fallacies. Okay, everything works, nothing works forever. So these are very strong individuals here. This is a study from our group here, looking at professional rugby union athletes. So these are athletes that are playing for Australia. This is their age. Obviously, they're getting a year older each year. Not much change in body mass. They've put on a little bit of size. Okay, their skin folds are pretty constant as well here. We use a measure quite often called lean mass index. I'll show you that later on this afternoon to indicate their actual muscle mass. It's a relationship. All it requires is their body weight and then some skin folds, and then we calculate their lean mass index from that. You can see some good increases in bench press here of over 10 kilograms. As a relative to body weight, they've gone from 1.28 bench press up to 1.39 in terms of body weight. Squat strength's gone from 1.5 up to 1.67. 1.67, that's not a strong athlete. Okay? I can squat 1.67 body weight. So these are not terribly strong. Interesting though, these are players that actually play for Australia. Shouldn't be letting out too many secrets, should I? But if we have a look at the changes in their lean mass index, so this is this relationship between their skin folds and their body weight, what we see is a pretty strong relationship here with squat 1RM. So as we put more size on this playing group, as we got them bigger, reduced their skin folds slightly, that also corresponds to their increase in 1RM strength with a pretty strong relationship there. So at this level, we know that whilst we can produce a lot of neural changes, probably an underlying feature, and for most of the athletes that you work with, we still have to stay focused on putting more muscle size on them. This is an interesting study. If you get an opportunity, Paul Comfort is based at Salford University in Manchester and has done some really nice research in this area, and I recommend his papers to you. This was in rugby league players again, and this is looking at one of the age-old things that a lot of coaches say, yeah, but I don't want my athletes to do strength training because it'll make them slow. They won't be able to run anymore. If they do a lot of squats, then that'll interfere with their running style and their running pattern will change and they'll fall over or something. There's absolutely no research to support that whatsoever. If you strength train your athlete a week before they're supposed to run and they haven't strength trained before, yes, that will interfere with their running. Okay? They may not be even sore. They may have got over the soreness, but there will be a washout period before they actually produce an increase in sprint speed. I think that's a reason why a lot of coaches have probably moved away from strength training or have not embraced strength training, because strength training done poorly will result in a bad outcome. It will either injure the athlete at worst, or it will actually cause a decrement in performance. So it has to be pursued intelligently. So in this particular study, quite interesting, these are rugby league athletes in the United Kingdom, and this is the training program. They did very, very basic training. They did a strength cycle and a power cycle here, and this was only a 12-week training intervention in the pre-season. This is their heavy and light day. Back squats, mid-thigh clean pull, Romanian deadlift and Nordic curls, that's all they did. And then their power cycle was hang power, clean squat, jumps, back squats and Nordic curls. So very, very basic strength and power training periodised program. These are the changes in body mass and strength. They put on a little bit of size, a bit over 1 kilogram here, what, to 1.5 kilograms. But their absolute strength went from 1.78 body weights to 2.05 body weights in the back squat. Okay, so it's a nice increase, and I think this figure's important. So they did get considerably stronger over that time period. But of course the key outcome in terms of rugby league, rugby union is, okay, how much you can back squat? No. The coach wants to know, do they run faster, do they hit harder? Well, this is their actual translation of strength training, strength gain to sprinting. This is pre and post. We see at all distances, 5, 10 and 20 metres, the training group was actually faster. they didn't do any sprint training. The only change that was made was that strength and power training program that I showed you. And yet they improved their sprint speed at all 3 distances measured. Sorry, it was only 8 weeks. So I guess the take-home point from that is that in already trained athletes, these guys are rugby league players, they're playing professionally in the English league, that a fairly modest injection over only 8 weeks of a strength power training program actually made them faster. So there is no evidence at all to suggest that strength training will make you slower if the strength training is done properly. Big question, of course, is how do you make the athlete bigger? What sort of training variables? Look, to be honest, there's some rough rules that you can use, some recommendations. Andrew Fry has tended to recommend 75 to 95% of 1RM. Greg Huff, 65 to 85% of 1RM. So the actual loading, you see quite a wide range. Some recommendations are for like a 6RM load, so loads around that where relatively heavy, you can only complete 6 repetitions. Others recommend a more typical bodybuilding program of 10 to 15 repetition maximum. What's best? It's probably not known. It depends on the athlete. It's probably an interaction with their fibre type. We know that predominantly mixed fibre type athletes, so say 50-50 fast and slow twitch athletes will tend to respond better to higher rep ranges. More fast twitch athletes will hypertrophy more with heavier weightlifting, heavier weight training. So it is probably fibre type related. The big issue, of course, is the cumulative fatigue that occurs. We do know that to produce significant hypertrophy, we have to have a regional volume load. Do you remember that a couple of slides ago we talked about volume load? So that's a problem. So you've got to try and avoid the cumulative metabolic fatigue that comes from hypertrophy type training, and that's why planning within the competition schedule is so critical. I think that's another area whereby strength and conditioning has failed because the strength and conditioning specialist has introduced a training intervention which has then resulted in the athletes turning up to practice or competition, worse, fatigued, tired and flat. That's put a bad impression then for strength and conditioning. So we have to avoid that. But it can be done in season. I'm going to show you some examples and I want to impress upon you how important it is. This is just one example again from Dan Baker's work. This is an in-season program in professional and college-age rugby league players. This is the workout. Remember, this is in season. Okay, so there's the various days across the week. Monday was they play on a Saturday or a Sunday, and so Monday is generally an active rest recovery day. They don't do nothing, but it's lower volume there. And then they did the various weights, skill training, etc., conditioning across here, and then on Saturday they did team practice there. So that's the type of session. So you're looking at 2 weight training sessions per week on a Tuesday and a Thursday. Because they're already highly strength trained, it doesn't interfere with their ability to play in the competition on the weekend. I suggest that, guys, if you've never strength trained your athletes, if you strength train them on a Tuesday and strength train them on a Thursday, they'll be very flat if they have to play on Sunday. So, it's intelligent, don't make those sort of mistakes, because your coach, the head coach is not going to speak to you ever again. But this is across a 29-week season here, and I think it's very instructive to have a look here. We look at 1RM bench press, started out 138 kilos, 136, 137. Even at the end of the season, it was still at 136 kilos. Bench press power was maintained or even slightly increased, and jump squat power was pretty much maintained. So this is one of the few studies in season to show that there is no reason at all, even in highly strength trained individuals, that with an appropriate in-season strength program, that strength, size and power can be maintained. We've done a lot of work with volleyball, for example, and we'd see every single season the athletes would start out great, we had a great preparation, they'd start the season, by the time they're at the end of the season in the finals, they were rubbish, physiologically. They were weak, they were tired and their power was down. Their vertical jump was lower at the end of the season. Imagine being a volleyball player and your worst vertical jump for the entire yearly phase was in the finals. It's not a good strategy. So we need to look at ways in which we can maintain their size, strength and power so that they are at least at the same level during the most critical games at the end of season as they are at the end of the pre-season preparation. Another argument which we get a lot is we make them stronger, but does it actually make them faster? Now, we talked about this morning. One thing which is bandied around a lot is just get them strong and everything else will fall into place. I hope that's not the message that you've got from me this morning, because it's not the case. It's much more complex than that. Strength is important. We have to get them. We have to get the athletes strong. But there's arguments for and against this type of strength at all costs type of approach. For many, many years in North America, particularly in football and basketball, this was the approach. Bench, squat, deadlift, get them as big, as strong as you possibly can, everything else will work out. Very simplistic approach to that. Depends on the individual athlete and their responses and adaptations, their training history, fibre type, even down to that level, and the competition demands as well. Once again, the main take-home point from today is you can be strong but not fast. This is demonstrated in powerlifters. It's very interesting to have a look at powerlifters. You know, powerlifters, their sport is bench press, deadlift and back squat. Those three lifts, that's their sport, that's all they do. Exceptionally strong. When they're tested for power, their power output is quite low relative to example to a weightlifter, an Olympic weightlifter, where they are probably equally as strong in something like a back squat, but their power is way, way higher. It's related to the type of training that they do. Doing slow squatting continuously will make the athletes stronger, but will not necessarily increase their speed. There's some evidence that it might make them slower. So the challenge for all of you guys is, how do you balance this? How do you balance strength, power and the endurance that you're trying to maintain in your athletes? It's a huge challenge, particularly for team sports. Who works with team sports? It'd be funny if no one's hand went up, wouldn't it? Okay, so about a third, I guess. It's a challenge in that type of environment. Matching the competition demands as well. We have a look at football, for example. The teams that I work with, for example, with Manchester United and Chelsea, the guys are playing 2-3 times, in some instances, per week. How do you actually work in a meaningful strength and conditioning program with that? It's a challenge. I'm not saying this is easy by any means. I feel for you guys. I think the ways in which it can be managed, and we're using a lot of this, is in competition monitoring. We spend a lot of time on load monitoring, trying to work out how much volume the athlete is doing in training and in competition. Quite often our strategy has come undone, has fallen over or failed, because we haven't actually been monitoring all of the variables. And that's when we've actually broken athletes. So the latest drive you'll see, is to try and monitor all aspects of what the athlete is doing, and then modifying the training and recovery to try and keep them at peak performance, but without breaking them. So you'll see any pro sport today, in team sport, will be using GPS and video. Some of the latest systems, there's a new radio system available now where you can track the athletes on the field to an incredible accuracy. The whole purpose of why we do this is so that we can actually, at any point in time, know their history, how much work they have done, at what levels of intensity. So then we can modify the training to ensure that we're training them optimally, but without pushing them over the edge. It's the bigger picture as well around athlete resilience, and we'll talk about that, overtraining, competition schedule, career longevity. A lot of the coaches are saying to me, look, we have a long-term plan for this athlete. You know, this athlete, it's no good to us if they have a great season and then you burn them, because good athletes are hard to come by, as you all know. So these days, a very large emphasis is to try and keep athletes competitive for as long as possible. You're investing an enormous amount of effort and money into them, and so it's important to keep them resilient and to be able to have a reasonable length of career for them. As one of the coaches said to me over and over again, he said, Rob, I'd rather have all of my top players on the field at 90% than my second string on every week at 100%. The take-home message is, he said, keep them well, keep them fixed and keep them on there. I don't care if they're only running around at 80 or 90%. That's okay. I'd rather have my best squad out there than have them sitting in physio, rehab. So we have to take this into consideration as well. This is, I think, related to this point and how important it is we have to avoid catabolism and catastrophe. The greatest thing that I have to manage now with the teams that I work with is not lack of training, not lack of commitment, it's overtraining. It's a constant process of trying to present to the coach, this is not the strength and conditioning, to the head coach, is the volume of work that the athlete is doing and how that relates to their neuromuscular state. So we spend a lot of time assessing how neurally ready, how metabolically recovered the athlete is, and how that then interacts with the competition and training that we're giving them. Most of the athletes that I deal with are overtrained. They're tired. They break easily. That's a problem. One of the reasons for this, of course, is that the huge volumes of training that we throw at them decrease muscle and bone. You all know, if you give an athlete a large amount, if you go through a period of endurance training, their muscles will get smaller and they will get weaker. If you want to flatten an athlete's vertical jump, send them out for a 5k run. No problems at all. Do it every day for 10 days and you'll really flatten them. So we have to be careful in terms of managing that. And also, it lowers tendon stiffness. When we have athletes training at high volumes, such as in swimming, it's problematic because it actually weakens their connective tissue. They're catabolic. Their cortisol levels are high. Cortisol is the catabolic hormone. Their testosterone levels are low. So their connective tissue in their body is compromised. So of course they're going to break. Their shoulders are going to go. They're going to do an ACL, catastrophic injury. Or what we're seeing a lot in football sports is they're getting stress fractures because their bone density is low. They're catabolic. One of the drivers for this is the philosophy, I think that's all what you would have to call it, is that fitness can be optimally gained through gameplay and practice, the sport. I deal with this a lot in soccer and swimming. Constantly I'm working with swimming coaches who say, no, they need to spend more time in the pool. To get faster, they just need to swim more. They just need to swim more. The problem with that is it just creates a highly catabolic environment where you're breaking the athlete down. You're giving no opportunity for repair or growth. You're not creating an environment within the athlete which is anabolic for them to grow and to improve. So the resiliency is sacrificed. It's critical for us, and we monitor these hormones, to maintain testosterone in men and women. Growth hormone and IGF-1 has to be up, and we have to limit cortisol. We spend a lot of time monitoring these hormones, particularly testosterone, to cortisol ratio, and then manipulating training, recovery and diet to try and maintain that at an anabolic level. It does go up and down. When you've got a star player that you have to put out on the field for a series of critical games, these will fall. What we try and do is minimise that catabolic environment as much as we can. And then, when we've got an opportunity to recover them and adapt the training, we try and get these back up. I mean, many of you will remember, well, actually looking at you, probably none of you will remember, some of you will remember, or will have read, the incredible training regimes that many of the athletes used prior to the drug testing days. It's fascinating. There's a great sports scientist, an ex-athlete called Tibor Hortobagi. He's in the US now, but he was an Eastern Bloc athlete. And, I've seen some of his training programs. If you gave it to an athlete today, you'd kill them. It's just not possible. But of course, in those days, the athletes were loaded up with anabolics. So their levels of testosterone were through the roof. Now, as we all know, testosterone is an incredible hormone in terms of repair. So it makes us a bit like the Wolverine. You know Wolverine? Everyone knows Wolverine. He's an Australian. All Australians are Wolverines, so be careful. But he gets shot, he gets stabbed, he repairs like that. This is what the steroids do. This is what the athletes, their tolerance for training volume was unbelievable. Their ability to repair and recover, unbelievable. Their bone tissue, their connective tissue, made them superhuman. Now that's illegal for good reason. But what we have to do in our environment now is to simulate that anabolic environment. We have to adjust the training and recovery processes so that we keep our athletes in an anabolic state. And problem is, we're not focused on that at the moment. We have to mimic anabolic steroids legally. One of the greatest, I believe, reasons for strength and conditioning to be part of every single sport preparation. And I don't care if it's synchronised swimming or if it's gymnastics. The coach says, but strength, power, it's just not part of my sport. The athletes should be pursuing at least some aspect of strength and power training simply to keep them resilient, if nothing else, to keep them in an anabolic environment. All performance aspects apart, forget about performance. We need to give them this environment simply so they can recover and tolerate the demands of training. Quite often, in a lot of sports, we were talking about surfing yesterday. Strength and power is sacrificed for aerobic capacity. The coach and the athletes are focused entirely on the aerobic endurance of the athlete. And surfing's a good example. Surfers have always just been focused on aerobic training and would never do strength and power training. And yet, if you examine the sport, it's a strength-power sport, if you look at the biomechanics of it. We pursue this not only for performance, but to keep our athletes resilient. And also, strength training builds a more symmetrical machine. This again is a problem. Humans weren't meant to do the same thing over and over again. We were meant to do a whole range of different activities. We were meant to run, we were meant to jump, we were meant to throw. We were meant to throw with our right hand, we were meant to throw with our left hand. That's how we evolved. So when we take up a sport like tennis, where we're doing the same movement on the same side over and over again, or swimming, where we're doing the same arm movements for 5-10 kilometres a day, right? We develop imbalances in strength and also in terms of structure. And that is why our swimmers develop shoulder problems, elbow problems, etc. Problems with the hip, back pain, you name it. We weren't meant to do the same thing over and over. Strength training if for no other reason, should be applied to our athletes to maintain symmetry, to maintain balance in them to protect their system. One of the things which I've seen over and over again in working particularly in the, with NBA athletes is some athletes just, they're always broken. Brilliant skills. Where's my friend, the martial artist guy? He's gone. He's moved seats. That confused me. Many athletes, and you might have experienced this, just wonderful skills, wonderful tactics. But they're always with the physio. Okay, you get them out, you get them on the court, you get them on the field or out on the track, and they're great, a couple of runs, a couple of months, next minute, there he is. And then they break. In my experience, which is 30 years now, strong athletes are more resilient. They're harder to break. There's all sorts of reasons for that, not the least of which is strong athletes have much more resilient connective tissue. Their tendons and ligaments are larger and stronger and stiffer, so they break less. Their bones are harder and more dense, so they break less. But their strength also allows them to train at higher levels without damage. So strong athletes are hard to kill. A famous saying, I don't know if you've ever heard of Al Vermeil. Anyone heard of Al Vermeil? No? Oh, geez. Poor old Al would be disappointed. He was the strength and conditioning performance manager for the Chicago Bulls. They built him his own facility. He looked after the Bulls for, it must have been 20 years. And one of his famous sayings was, don't bring a feather duster to a sword fight. Your athlete is going out onto the court or onto the track or whatever, and a whole bunch of other people are trying to beat them. You want to send them out with the weapons they need. It may not be a combative sport, but the same rules apply. If it's high jump, don't send them out with a feather duster to the high jump, okay? Send them out with I was going to say bloody then. Is that a swear word in Portugal? With a bloody big sword. That's what you want to send them out with. Okay. I'm still selling the muscle size and strength argument. This is a really interesting paper if you get an opportunity from Pedersen and February. And this was published in Nature Reviews Endocrinology, pretty highbrow journal, that particular one, in 2012. Every single day we learn more about the human and how it works and how it responds. And things that we thought to be law, thought to be true, even 3 to 5 years ago, many of those things have now been entirely thrown out. This is an interesting one because what we now know is that muscle is in fact a critical secretory organ. So we normally think of muscle as producing movement, increasing body temperature. That's its function. What we now know is that constantly your muscle system is secreting chemicals within itself. So it's said to be a paracrine gland because it's signalling other muscle cells around it. But it is also an endocrine gland. It is secreting chemical signals, some of which we haven't even discovered yet. We don't even know what they are, constantly into your system, and that is signalling every single other tissue, organ, and system in your body. So the mass of muscle that your athlete has and how you are exercising that muscle determines the secretory characteristics of the muscle and the effects that it has. When you are at rest, when you're sitting there, your muscles are sending chemical messages out. They're generally bad ones in terms of cardiovascular health and diabetes. When you're exercising and doing different forms of exercise, it is sending out other messages, which are producing changes. As one example, one of the main drivers of bone density is the chemical messages like IGF-1, which are coming from the muscle, signalling the bone to say, hey, you better get stronger and harder because the muscle system's coming at you. That's the sort of analogy of what it is like. So there's a good argument then in our athletes that we should be doing certain types of training, if nothing else, to produce the medicine that the body needs for it to repair and recover. This is just a very simplified diagram from the Pedersen-Fabreo article here of just some of the substances. There's a lot of interleukins being released here, myostatin, whole range of hormones which are being produced as well, so as IGF-1. These are then targeting all other tissues in the body. It's targeting bone, IGF-1 here, targeting bone, to make it lay down more tissue, to make it stronger and more resilient. We have IL-6 signalling to the pancreas in terms of glucose modulation. We have still other hormones like IL-6 and irisin actually signalling to the fat cells to alter their function, to the liver here. It's signalling to the nervous system as well. Now, this is all very new. This is not well understood. But every day we're finding more about this system and how the muscle is actually producing medicine for all the other systems in the body to try and repair them, maintain them and make them better. If we do not maintain this system, the muscular system in terms of mass and how we activate it, we are compromising the athlete's ability to use their internal medicine. How are we going? Any questions? Getting a bit heavy now. Yes. Do we have a microphone, please? Is this it?
Thank you. Related with this response, what is your opinion about vascular restriction?
Yes.
Like Katsu training?
Yes.
It's my question.
The drivers for this muscle signalling is a whole range of different things, and we will talk about it when we talk about hypertrophy training, but there are many different pathways and drivers for muscle growth. One of those drivers is the hypoxia that occurs within the muscle. So the gentleman asked the question or made the comment that several studies have shown that occluding blood flow is actually producing some nice hypertrophy and some nice signalling from that. And it's due to the hypoxia that occurs, and that is a stress upon the muscle, and the muscle responds by producing these sort of anabolic effects to it. So yes, it does work, although the evidence in athletes is not as strong. Most of the occlusion work, as you know, has been done in normal people or older people or patient populations. Yeah, but it's the same mechanism. By stressing the muscle, the muscle tissue, it is then responding internally by producing growth promoters, such as IL-6 and myostatin, and also signalling the rest of the body as well. Yes.
Let's say we have an old-timer when it comes to strength training in martial art sports. He has been training for 10 years or so, and he has reached, let's say, 2.5 his body weight in bench press, deadlift, squats. And he's on the limit of his weight division. Yeah. Where do we go from there? Do we just maintain the strength levels, or what's your opinion?
Look, it depends entirely on what the strategy is in terms of whether the coach and the athlete believes they could have greater success at a higher weight division. Look, if the fellow's at that strength level, and given the volume of training that he has to do outside of weight training, it's unlikely that he'll be able to put that amount of weight on, lean mass. I think this is a common misconception. Constantly the swim coach says to me, I don't want my athletes to blow up and look enormous. If you're swimming 10 Ks a day, you can't grow. You just don't have that ability. The system, the body can't maintain that anabolic environment to grow. So I'd suggest that it would be difficult to put that much size on him, and that if it wasn't a conscious strategy that, look, I think I could have more success if I moved up a division, there's many other neural types of training that can be done to increase your strength and power without any increase in body weight.
Thank you.
Okay. I'll just have a quick drink. Okay, I just want to talk about testosterone for a moment because does anyone remember Mr. T? Yeah? That's good. Sometimes you wonder whether your jokes... I give these talks in China a lot and you tell these sort of jokes and everyone just looks really blank at you, so it just falls really flat. But testosterone's just an amazing hormone, obviously, in terms of its effect. It affects all systems in the body, every single one. It's an extremely powerful anabolic hormone. It influences muscle, bone. It also influences the brain and peripheral nerves. Give you one example. A lot of groups around the world are researching Alzheimer's disease, having great success with testosterone patches. I do a lot of work in prostate cancer. One of the main treatments for prostate cancer in about a third of men is we give them drugs to take away testosterone. Immediately their motivation, their cognitive function and memory decline. Testosterone is a very powerful hormone, not just on muscle and bone, but also on the nervous system as well, and also psychologically it has enormous effects, which we'll talk about in a moment. But it's a major mediator of tissue repair. It's in there involved, it's targeting specifically to the nuclei of the muscle cells in terms of their recovery process. It drives greater proliferation of satellite cells. When testosterone is high, the muscle repairs faster. If the athlete has compromised testosterone, the muscle doesn't repair as quickly. The chronic release is greatest during heavy resistance training and large muscle mass with high volume. And we'll have a look at some training examples of how we stimulate testosterone. Guys, honestly, if for no other reason would you have your athletes strength training on a regular basis, it would be simply to get their testosterone level up. Because the benefits from testosterone are so high that it would justify taking that 1 or 2 hours a week out to actually train them with a really targeted strength training session, if for no other reason to get testosterone up, because the benefits are that large. See, these are just a couple of the studies I've just pulled out here, looking at the effects of intensity and volume on acute total testosterone here. Increases, some no change, most of them are significant increases. Here we've got up to 30% in this particular study. Kramer's probably done most of the classical work here, significant increases. The different types of interventions vary in terms of the rep ranges that has produced benefits. If we have a look here, here's 20 sets of 1 RM squat, no change. So it appears that you have to do this from Hacknett. It appears, then you had a look at 10 sets of 10 reps with 70%, you got significant change. The point I'm trying to make is that the testosterone response is specific to the type of training that you do. It appears to be multiple sets of around 6 to 10 repetitions to produce this response. It also appears that you have to get some stimulation of or rise in lactic acid to maximise the effect as well. We'll talk a little bit more about this afternoon when we have a look at hypertrophy training. But these are the same as the changes that occur with testosterone supplementation without training. So this is no weight training. This is just taking people and giving them testosterone. 27% increase in protein synthesis. 6.1 gain in one study of lean mass. Another study showed a 20% increase in muscle mass. Muscle size increases in terms of cross-sectional area. So we've got triceps and quadriceps increasing markedly in cross-sectional area with no training. Just give them testosterone. Now, as you guys all know, it's illegal with athletes. It's not illegal with old men. It's not a problem. But with athletes, it's illegal. So we have to train the athlete in specific ways to increase testosterone. Bloody hell, they even get stronger. Bench press up 22 kilos and squat up 38 kilos, just by giving them testosterone. Yes?
This happened in what amount of time?
Oh, it varies. They're all different studies. So it tends to be around between 8 and 12 weeks. Yep. Yes?
This happens both men and women?
Yes, there's a mixture of studies there. The effect is greater in women for obvious reasons. It's a greater contrast. Women have around 1/10 the level of circulating testosterone as men. So you give them testosterone, you get a really nice effect. Because they're not used to it. Their system's not used to it. Not that, well, you do get that sort of effect, but we're not going to go there, all right? Pedro drove me out yesterday afternoon. He said, don't talk about sex, whatever you do. It's off limits. I've talked a lot about the problems we've been dealing with lately in our work with professional athletes, and a major concern for us is the connective tissue issues that we're having. We're seeing less catastrophic fractures because of changes to the game. In rugby league, rugby union, Australian rules football or Gaelic football, I think you call it here, we're not seeing the same catastrophic fractures, bone fractures, simply because the rules have been changed. It's still hard hitting, but you know they've changed the way things go, so we're getting less of that. But our chronic bone fractures are going through the roof. And what we're seeing is that the bone density of these athletes is no different to an age-matched sedentary control. This is a problem for an athlete which is undergoing extremely high levels of training workload and is also running around a field where another guy's trying to rip his head off. That's a problem because he's going to be injured. So testosterone has a very strong anabolic effect on bone and other connective tissues. If your athlete is overtrained and is not receiving appropriate testosterone stimulating training, then low testosterone and elevated cortisol causes tissue quality and quantity changes which reduce the failure threshold. They are more likely to break. Their tendons, ligaments and bone are weaker in this environment. Injury goes up, their resilience goes down, their recovery is much, much slower. What we're doing now a lot with our injured athletes is that we immediately put them onto a testosterone anabolic training program. So while the physical therapist is there working away, trying to, they've got a hamstring tear, for example, they can be working away doing the rehab, the exercises, the massage, the electrotherapy on the hamstring. But if the athlete's not training, their testosterone's down, growth hormone's down, cortisol's up because they're stressed, that's not a good environment to rehabilitate an athlete. If you're rehabilitating an athlete, that is the time to really lift their anabolic environment. And so if we have an athlete who, for example, has a shoulder tear, okay, or even a fracture, we'll have them doing heavy leg press, all right, large muscle groups, heavy exercise, because that peaks growth hormone, IGF, and testosterone. Systemically, that increases the anabolic environment, so any form of rehabilitation has to work faster because they're creating their internal medicine to repair their body quicker. All right? You're creating wolverines. Oh, better check the time. 1 o'clock, wasn't it? Well, 1 o'clock or 1:30, I'm sorry? I forgot. 1 o'clock. Okay, so we've got half an hour, okay? And then we'll have another break for lunch.